Hey, welcome to Superfluous Studios. I'm Jeff. Today, I've got a vintage amp demo for you, and it's not just any amp, it's a PA conversion of a Bogen Challenger CHB35a. Now, if you're here, you probably know that converting old tube PAs into guitar amps has become a really popular thing to do. In particular, you hear a lot about Bell & Howell Filmo sounds and Mascos. And along with that, you sometimes see a lot about Challengers out there, but maybe they don't get quite the fanfare that the Bell & Howells and Mascos do. So today, I'm going to talk to you about the Bogen, I'll play through it, and I'm going to give you 3 reasons why I think this might actually be the perfect PA for people who want to get into converting these old PAs into guitar amps. So stick around and find out why I think that. Alright, so let's jump in. If this stuff bores you, jump ahead. I put the times below for where I talk about who I think this amp might be great for and those 3 reasons why. I also put the time to where I do the demo, so if you just want to hear it, jump ahead to there. This particular amp is from 1968, and specifically May 13th, 1968, apparently is when it rolled off of the assembly line in New Jersey. So as of today, it just turned 55 years old a few weeks ago. This one came to me in not great cosmetic condition, but completely original and untouched. In stock form, these amps came with a ton of ins and outs so that they could be used in lots of different ways for what they were intended for as PAs. They do take a little bit of work to get them into shape to be a guitar amp because you need to add in the inputs and outputs that are appropriate for that. It does come with screw terminal outputs. As for the circuit, this amp is based on 2 12AX7s for the input. One is the input amplifier, and the second one is for the tone stack, which consists of a treble and a bass control. From there, it goes to a 6C4 tube, which is a single triode for the phase inverter. It's a cathodiene phase inverter, if that means anything to you. From there, it goes to the power amp section, where it has 2 7868 tubes in push-pull configuration. Now, these are a little bit different than the 6V6s and 6L6s that you see in most American amps from that time period, but they're actually not that uncommon. It turns out that a 7868 is just a 9-pin version of the 8-pin 7591 tube. And if that one sounds familiar to you, it's because it's used in a lot of the amps from that time made by Ampeg. These are known as being very high-quality tubes, often associated with more of a hi-fi sound, as they were also used in a lot of hi-fi amplifiers in that time. Now, this particular Challenger has a solid-state diode rectifier. Another common Bogen that you'll see out there is the Bogen Challenger 33. Now, don't get that mixed up with this one, because even though they're 33 and 35, they're very different circuits. And that has 6L6s for the power stage. So that's actually going to be a lot closer to a Fender Vibrolux or Tremolux from that era. And those can sound amazing. In addition, I think those Challenger 33s look a lot better than these 35s. So if you're looking at this, you might want to consider that amp as well. So for this particular amp, I left the circuit stock so you'll see how it sounds in its natural state. I did have to make a couple of repairs to it. I replaced the filter caps, as is often needed in amps of this age, and a couple of the coupling caps were also dead, and I replaced those with Mallory 150s. So why do I like this amp? Well, I think it's got 3 really big things going for it. First, they're cheap. You see these things usually listed in the $200 to $300 range, but I think realistically they're selling more in the $100 to $200 range depending on the condition that they're in. They're easy to find, particularly here on the East Coast where they were made. I think these were very common in schools and gyms and little leagues and things like that, so you still see a lot of them sitting around in places like that and being sold at auctions for people who have cleared places out. So at that price, I think this is a really nice way to get into a high-quality PA amp that makes a good guitar amp. Now, are Bell & Howell, Filmo Sounds, and Mascos really great? Yeah, they are. They can make absolutely fantastic amps. But you got to remember, those Bell & Howells are usually going for a minimum of $300 to $400 now, and that amp is going to need a lot of very challenging work to get it working even in its stock circuit. And those things go for thousands of dollars, depending on who modded them, if they've already been made into a guitar amp. And then you have Mascos. That's another one of the very popular, great-sounding PA conversions out there. Those I rarely see anymore. They're hard to find, and when you do see them listed, if they're unmodded, they tend to be in the $700 to $1,000 range. and they go up from there when they're modded, depending on who they're modded by. So for this amp, you can get into it a lot cheaper, and it's a great one to work on, especially if you're a beginner, because what's the worst thing that happens if you screw it up, as opposed to one of those other much more valuable amps? Second, and maybe most important, I think it sounds great even with its stock circuit. It's 35 watts, so it's pretty loud, and you can get good headroom out of this, so you can get a good clean tone, and I like the crunch and distorted tone on this. To me, this one has a lot more drive to it than most of the other 7591 or 7868 amps out there, especially the amp pegs, which tend to be pretty clean even when you get loud. You'll see this one gets pretty distorted, and I like the way that sounds. In addition to that, I think the tone controls work really well on this. It's a pretty bassy amp, so I find myself usually turning the bass down pretty low, but there's a huge range on there, so it works really well with a lot of different guitars, with different levels of distortion and clean, and with different speakers. The treble control works well. Can turn it up and get some nice sparkle to it, or turn it down and keep it darker. Big range on both of those for big versatility. And my third reason for liking this amp a lot is that it's incredibly easy to work on. And there's a few things that go into that. First of all, it's got a big chassis with a lot of space in there. It's not totally point-to-point. There's a number of tag boards in there with components attached to them, but it's pretty close to point-to-point, so it's very easy to follow those components around and see where things are laid out, get to them, work on them as necessary. That also helps with learning about circuits a lot. Along with that, this amp has a schematic that's very easy to find online. This particular schematic is one of the best drawn and best annotated schematics out there. So it's incredibly easy to follow with a pretty simple circuit. So especially for a beginner, this is a great one to work on. So a couple of things that I like about this schematic is that it's very clearly drawn. You can blow it up pretty big and still see things very easily. It also has the voltage chart printed on the schematic. Now that's incredibly helpful for troubleshooting, and if you're just getting into amps and trying to troubleshoot them or fix them up, it's a great way to learn. You'll also notice in the schematic that there's a lot of versatility to the ins and outs in this amp, and it has 4, 8, and 16 ohm taps on that output transformer. So in addition to generally being a versatile amp in terms of sound, you can also hook this up to pretty much any guitar cabinet that you want to, since it has those 3 different taps. And the bonus of having such an easy amp to work on is that this would also make a fantastic platform to mod. Now again, I've got this in the stock circuit today, but this has 2 identical inputs using the 2 sides of that first 12AX7. So there's a ton that you could do with that. You could cascade those and probably get some wicked preamp gain out of this thing. Or you could change those inputs up so you have 2 different inputs for 2 different sounds, kind of like Fender amps from the era would do. The other thing that makes this really easy to work on is that there's a lot of information out there about how to repair and mod these. If you're talking about Mascos and Filmo sounds, the people who do those and know a lot about them tend to keep the secrets pretty close to their chest, probably because it's a pretty big business and they're valuable. This one, though, I don't think there's much value in these, even when they're modded and sound good. So I think maybe that's why it's a little bit easier to find information on modding these on the internet. Quick note about my setup so you know what you're listening to here. I've got this mic'd with a Royer 121 and a Shure SM57. I use those because I think they get a pretty true sound to what I'm hearing in the room. I put a little bit of reverb on it at the end just to take some of the dryness off of the sound, but otherwise it's completely unprocessed. Alright, let's see how it sounds now. I've got my American Ultra Telecaster here. I've got it set clean. I've got the volume around 3 or so. I've got the bass and treble right around 5 for both of those. You can get a ton of bass out of this, like I said before, if you crank it up from there. Switch over to the middle position. And here's the bridge pickup. So here we go with it cranked up to 10. Let's see what it does. Okay, so that should give you a sense of what this amp can do with its stock circuit through one speaker. Again, it's very versatile. You can get a lot more good sounds out of this, and you can really change it a lot with a different speaker as well. Overall, I think this is a really nice amp, especially at the price point. I'm pretty sure I paid around $100 for this one, and it realistically has probably $150 worth of tubes in it alone. Are there things that I don't like about the amp? Yeah, there's a couple things. First of all, it's probably never going to be worth a lot of money. Even if this is modded and sounds great, these just don't go for that much. So if you're looking for something that you can get cheap and mod and make it into a $1,000 amp like a Filmo Sound or a Masco or something, this probably ain't it. They don't have high resale value, even modded. The second thing I don't really like about this amp is the way it looks. I think it's a horribly ugly amp, and I mentioned this at the beginning, but I think that might be part of the reason why these aren't more popular. All of those other options that we've talked about here are much better looking amps in my opinion. And if you're going for something vintage like this, you probably want something that looks good, right? Now, some of the other Challengers are a little bit better looking. The 33 in particular looks pretty good to me. Many of the other ones are styled just like this, though. So I would check this out, and I would check out the 33, see if you like that better. Those, I think, go for about the same price, maybe a little bit more than these, maybe closer to $200 to $300. And they tend to be a little bit harder to find as well. The other thing that I would call out about this amp is those 7686 tubes are pretty expensive. They're kind of hard to find. You can certainly get them, but they seem to go for around $50 or more each. So retubing this with the power tubes is going to be at least $100 or so. Now you could switch out those 9-pin sockets very easily for an 8-pin socket and use 7591s, and that would open up some options. JJ makes those, and I think they're about $25, so that would certainly give you a little bit more flexibility there and some options for cheaper tubes. They're also a little bit easier to find. But overall, I think this is a great amp. I think it's got really nice clean tones, a lot of versatility in there. It can do a lot of different things, and I think it's got some good distortion too. It makes a good pedal platform also because the clean tones can get pretty loud, so you can use it for whatever pedals you want in there. So especially for the price, if you can find one of these for $100 or $150 or even $200, it could give you a really nice platform to get into vintage PAs to turn into guitar amps. And again, this is the stock circuit in there, and there's plenty of information on the internet that you can find about how to mod these in different ways to make them sound even better. Let me know what you think in the comments if you agree that this is a great starter platform for people getting into PAs and it's got a pretty good versatile sound for the money. Also, if you have any particular mods you've heard on these and you really like, let me know, because this is still stock and I really am now starting to think about what to do with it to make it into something cooler.